Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. My name's Radha Priti, and I am here with a group of seekers studying the Bhagavad Gita. We do this every Monday and Thursday. If you ever want to join us, 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can message me for the links or email seekersquest108@gmail.com. So today we are continuing through the fifth chapter. I'm really excited for today's class because I think it has a lot of beautiful principles that if we really understood and vibed in our lives, we could really upgrade ourselves and our consciousness. So today we're going to talk about those times in your life. I don't know if this has happened to any of you guys, but when you're in your struggles or your mistakes, if you've thought, why is this happening to me? Right? Like whatever you're going through, it's like, why is this happening to me? Or maybe you've blamed God or yourself, right? When we blame God, we wonder if we're being punished. It's like if someone's up there pulling the strings. So in today's episode, we're diving into two verses from the Gita that shed powerful light on these questions. Krishna's going to tell us that he doesn't interfere with our choices, and he doesn't punish or reward us the way that we often think. Instead, there's something much deeper going on. So we're gonna explore how ignorance covers our true nature. It's a topic that we've talked about a lot. How karma unfolds, and most importantly, how spiritual knowledge can rise like the sun and illuminate our path. And this helps us to see ourselves, others, and God more clearly. So these verses are like a mirror showing us how we got here and how we can start to walk a different path, a freer, more conscious, and ultimately more joyful path. So with that, we'll get right into it. We're going to start with 5:15. Does somebody want to volunteer to read today? Stacy, great. We just have two verses. We'll start with 5:15. I share my screen.
Mute. There we go. I couldn't unmute. 15. You want me to read 15 and oh, you're there. Okay.
Yeah, just start with 15.
Okay. Here we go. Nor does the Supreme Lord assume anyone's sinful or pious activities. Embodied beings, however, are bewildered because of the ignorance which covers their real knowledge.
Thank you. So if you remember in the last verse in 5:14, we talked about how the soul is not the doer. Our soul is not the doer, how it's material nature that's acting. And this is like if you've ever snapped at someone you love, not because you wanted to hurt them, but because you were maybe tired or triggered or caught up in your own story. Right? It's like that. It's helpful to understand that that wasn't actually you, the soul, who wanted that. It was just our old conditioning, your mind and your body just reacting. And that's what Krishna is saying here. It's as if we're driving a car and you don't know how to use the clutch or the brakes, and the car lurches and crashes. And it's not that the car's bad, it's just responding to your control. So the body and the mind are like a car, and the soul is the driver. But many of us forget that we're even in the driver's seat and don't even have the proper knowledge of how to drive. So this is what's happening. It's like, how often do we let the car of our mind drive itself, reacting on autopilot? So this is how it's material nature that's the doer here. So who's responsible for the way that we're made, right? God is not, right? The Lord is not responsible for anybody's sinful or pious activities. So when you do something good or bad, it's not the Lord it's not the God that's controlling you. That's making you do those things. Right? These things happen because the knowledge of who we actually are, our true identity, is covered by ignorance. And we'll talk a little bit later about how that happens, how we get covered by ignorance. But God is full of unlimited knowledge, riches, strength, fame, beauty, renunciation, right? These six opulences. He's always satisfied within himself. He doesn't need to create a particular situation for us. He doesn't need to like dabble in us. He's everything. He's all knowing. He's completely satisfied within himself. But we, the living entity, the soul, confused by our own ignorance, desires to be put in certain conditions of life, and then that triggers the chain of actions and reactions. We then face our karmic consequences because of that. So God is not the doer. We desire, and God sanctions. God is in the heart of every living being. We talked about that. We have our soul, each individual soul, we each have a soul. And then God is in the heart also as a Paramatma, right? The super soul. He can understand the desires of all of us. And there's a beautiful line that says, he can understand the desires of everyone as one can smell the flavor of a flower by being near it. So that's like the relationship between the soul and the super soul. Naturally, the super soul or God in the heart understands the soul's desire. So when we think that God is the doer, again, he's not actually the doer. He's sanctioning what we want. Okay? It's almost like a small boy who wants to lift a weight. Right? He's seen his father lift a weight and he wants to lift a weight. So he desires to do it and then he tries. And it's a pretty big weight. So there's like no way he can lift it on his own. But the father sees his son's desire, stands above him, and just out of love for his son, does the actual lifting. So the father has actually lifted the weight, but he can't be considered the only lifter. Okay? So unless the desire had been expressed, unless the son wanted to lift the weight and made the attempt to lift the weight, the father would have never helped, and the weight would have never been lifted. So just like the child, the living entity shouldn't become confused by false ego and pride and think that they're the doer of activities that he actually has no ability to perform. So at the same time, it's the living entity who's responsible for the activity because it's us who wanted to do it, right? We wanted to do it, we made the attempt, and we wanted to enjoy, whatever the fruits of whatever we were doing were, right? But when a living entity is ignorant of their relationship with God, he chooses his position to enjoy independently. And this is like welding themselves to material nature and placing ourselves under its control. And that's what happens here. So that's the relationship between the soul and God and material nature. The soul desires, material nature facilitates, and God sanctions. So in this way, we've all probably heard the little phrase like man proposes and God disposes. So, so sometimes we can go after something with all our heart and it still doesn't work out. And this doesn't mean that God is blocking us unfairly. It means that he's honoring a deeper law. Like maybe it's our karma. Maybe it's not what we truly needed. Or maybe we actually have a higher desire that we haven't seen yet. So in this way, we propose, nature acts, and God disposes. Not arbitrarily, but always with this perfect insight into our truest needs. Again, maybe it's karma that we deserved, like some kind of reaction that we're experiencing. And again, our karma is not always linear. So it may have not even been from, a second ago. It could have been from a life ago that we don't even remember. So it could be our karma. He could be acting in our best interest, or we could have a deeper desire that we don't even really understand. And that's what determines the consequences of our actions, right? That kind of formula. The Vedanta Sutra says that the Lord neither hates nor likes anyone, though he appears to. So he's neutral. God is neutral. Okay? And in this verse, Krishna is comparing the consciousness of a materialistic person with that of a karma yogi. So if someone's acting and they're not thinking of God, right? They're just thinking about their own enjoyment, just what they want, what they don't want. They're just solely acting on that kind of level, right? God doesn't get involved. He's neutral to everyone and he doesn't interfere with their desires. He doesn't, like we talked about, arbitrarily reward or punish anyone, but he sets up the laws of karma, like we've talked about, like the laws that govern this universe, just like there's laws that govern our community or our government, right? The laws that govern the universe are the laws of karma. He sets that up, but he doesn't interfere with how they play out. Unless someone surrenders to him. And we'll talk about that one next, how that looks. But again, with the materialistic person who just has their own selfish desires, they're just kind of subject. They're just bumping around, bouncing around in this universal system, and they're subject to the laws of karma. And God in that case is like the judge that's giving them that punishment. Again, it's not him giving it, but it's their own choices in this system, this universal system. So in this, people receive the results of their actions, which are good or bad, based on the system, not because he chooses, but because that's, the consequence of their action. So he does whatever is required according to the case, just like a judge does. So that's a materialistic person. If somebody desires Krishna, if somebody wants that relationship with God, God will take special care and encourage them to desire in such a way that one can attain him and be eternally happy. So when we surrender to God, he doesn't necessarily like erase our desires immediately, but he'll gently transform them. So he'll purify them so that they gradually become spiritual. So like if somebody desires success, God may fulfill that desire in a way that makes them realize that worldly success is not enough and pushes them to seek deeper fulfillment. Right? I know that was like, right out of my book of life, something that happened to me, right? Someone who wants a family. Krishna may give that, but also awaken deeper compassion, responsibility, and a longing for spiritual shelter. Again, I can attest to that one. If someone wants to serve, he'll give them more and more opportunities, which deepen their taste and connection. Also me. I don't know if you all can relate to these, but this is how God is with his devotee, right? So even material desires in the hands of God can become fuel for spiritual growth. And we remember we've talked about this many times that God's like a loving parent whose child keeps slamming the door. And he doesn't force it open, but he stays right outside, like waiting, even like the smallest crack to come in. So if we can understand how all this works, this is knowledge. If we can understand that the soul desires, material nature facilitates, God sanctions. And if we're materialistic, we're just running around in this universal system that's subject to these karmic laws. But if we open our hearts a little bit to God, he'll start coming in and not changing our desires, but transforming them so that they bring us closer to him, whatever it is. Has anybody had any experience in that? Once you start kind of turning your life over to spirit, you see how he kind of intervenes and transforms your desires into ways that bring you closer to him. Yeah. Stacy? Yeah. So this is again a kind of a beautiful thing about spiritual life, and this is the knowledge. So again, it's not the soul who's the doer, it's not the Lord who is the doer, it's the person's nature. So now we're going to talk about where exactly does that come from? Where does the person's nature come from? So the person's nature arises because a soul forgets who they are and takes on a false sense of identity. And a false sense of identity is just like all these little things that we identify in this world. I'm an employee, I'm a mother, I'm a child, I'm at whatever role you have. And that's not to say that it's like completely false. I mean, these are functional identities, but we have to understand that our true identity is the spirit soul. That's our true identity. And when we forget that I'm a soul and that we're meant to serve God, and we identify with the body, meaning we think that those kind of functional, those temporary identities are our soul identity, and that we're there to enjoy the world, we become under this illusion. We become confused. And this happens to us every day. Even those of us who like are constantly making this effort to remember, it still happens to us. Like when we're scrolling through Instagram, seeing someone else's success, and automatically we feel like we're not good enough, right? That's a symptom of this forgetfulness. We think that we're just this body and this mind. We're primarily identifying with that, which is measured by things like productivity or praise. And then we forget what our true identity is, that I'm a soul, that I'm loved by God, and that none of that defines me. So we all fall victim to this through the course of our days, through the course of our lives, and we have to constantly come back to this knowledge, to these practices to remember. And that's the process. And you'll see as you'll be able to tell as you're, able to kind of imbibe these principles more is when, maybe you have this inner feeling of not feeling good enough, but it starts to lessen over time. You start to become a little bit more confident. You start to become a little less insecure. This that's when this process is working. That's when you're starting to kind of imbibe some of these wisdom principles, is because you're understanding that your real worth doesn't come from these external things, and that your real worth is inherent to who you are, to your soul, that you're a part of God and that you're loved by God. And therefore, if we really imbibe that, I mean, we'll be both confident and humble. So that's what we're going towards. And we can see, as we're going along in life, we can tell how we're starting to imbibe these principles by how we're transformed. So when we identify with these things, when we start to feel these kinds of like we're not good enough, or we're really moved by praise or criticism, right? When we start to feel this way, we're confused. We've forgotten who we actually are. It's like having a fancy phone, but no connection. So you have tons of apps, but you have no access to the cloud, no real power. So that's what this process does. Bhakti, it reconnects us to our source. Because what are we without our source? It's just like a bag of like muscle and blood and bone just moving around in this world. So that's what Bhakti does. And we all know this, we can think about a time when we've chased something material like validation or achievement, appearance, and we've got it, but then we've still felt empty at the end. You see some of that, like some of the most famous, beautiful people are like the most depressed. And that's because their souls trying to get charged, trying to get fulfillment from the wrong charger, from the wrong source. And that's the way that we're designed. So, because of our identification with the body and this me centered mentality, we have what's called anartas. And anartas are like emotional clutter, things like greed, envy, pride, fear, things that make it hard to see things clearly or respond wisely. We get these anartas because we're overly identified with our material identities. Oh, Maria has her hand up. Thank you. I don't see this. Let me just finish this one, and then I want to hear from Maria. Um, so we all have these moments, when someone else gets attention and we feel invisible, or when we get praised and suddenly we feel superior. So that's the power of the false identity at work, and this creates some kind of ignorance. And by the covering of this ignorance, we get deluded. And because of this delusion, this is why we act in ways that is in line with our lower nature, right? That actually causes us harm, right? Or ways that causes the human body to go into lower bodies, right? So that we know about karma, and how if we desire lower things, we'll get a body that's suited to that. And so when we get like super covered by this delusion, and this ignorance really builds up like this thick film, we'll get a lower body. Because why do we need a human body that has the capacity for these higher realizations if we're not going to utilize it as such? We'll just get a lower body that can act out the desires, whatever desire that we have, that's maybe a little bit more primal or materialistic. So this happens when we behave out of envy or pride, right? We identify with these ways of behavior and we think that it's our essence. And then we risk getting pulled away by our desires, which can pull us down and entangle us. And I know Stacy talked about a really nice example in our last class, where she got in an argument with her husband, and where prior to spiritual knowledge, she would have just like not been able to let it go and just kind of like sulked in that emotional distress. In her, more kind of spiritually situated self, she can let that go easier. And that's what this is what we can hopefully do is when we see ourselves getting like overly involved in some of these material identities, we can kind of remember who we actually are, connect to that source, and we're able to get a little bit to get a little more disentangled. That's the practice, and that's the practice at work. It's not like you go from like, this super involved, super like emotionally entangled person to like nothing overnight. We'll still have our little mishaps, but we'll see that we're able to get over them quicker, that they maybe don't cause as many ripples in our life. And we'll see that. And that was what Stacy talked about in the last class, in that beautiful example. So when we start to understand that we're different than that, and that I'm a soul and I'm meant to love and serve God, then we'll become free from this bondage. So this is how our nature develops. We say, whatever nature we have, we get bound by it. This is how it develops. We get attached to these different identities, and then we start to live from that place, and we start to acquire all of these anartas, or these emotional clutter, these things that don't serve us. These are associated with our lower nature because we're caught in this material world of like competition and all the yuck that comes with those identities. Okay, now I want to hear from Maria. Thank you for, I don't see hands up, so thank you for telling me that. Okay, Maria,
Okay, I
please
think
share with us.
am I unmuted?
Yep, you're unmuted.
Okay, okay. I have kind of the opposite going on. I was living in this transcendental bliss for so many years, and then I kept having weird things happen, like I had to move really quickly because of somebody buying the landlord's place. Just weird stuff. And so I got through all that, and I thought, oh, maybe I can finally get back to just experiencing all this transcendental bliss. And here somebody is putting fraudulent charges on my checking account, and I have to run to the bank as soon as they open and figure out what's going on and probably get a new debit card or whatever. But all this material stuff keeps interfering, and I just want to live in this bliss.
Aw, thank you for sharing. I love how you always like provide like well, I have the opposite. Let me tell you. Um, yeah, no, and we should also understand that like just because we're spiritual or we're trying to develop this outlook on life and this connection with God, it doesn't mean that like we're gonna just be in bliss all the time, that it's just like 100% ecstatic all the time. In fact, as we start to make a little bit of progress, as we start to take a couple steps closer to Krishna, he'll throw something in our way just because we're starting to get really sincere. He'll throw something in our way just so that we can just to see how sincere we are. It's like, oh, I think everything's great and I'm so detached and connected to God. And then, something comes in our way that challenges us, that pushes us, that kind of forces us to really look at, what we are attached to and maybe shows us, that things about ourselves that were kind of hidden before, that maybe we need to work on a little bit so that we can become even more sincere. And that's like the next level up. It's like, okay, you got this level, you're doing great. Okay, let me give you the next level up. See how you do when your material security here is shaking. Where are you going to take shelter? Are you going to get stuck in that loop, in that like confusion and anger, or are you going to turn to me and take shelter of me and know that I'm actually taking care of you and this is your opportunity to level up? And that's the process. That's what happens. We take two steps forward. We're thinking we're in a really wonderful spot. Nothing can mess us up, and then God shows us, how much more surrendered we can be, how much more shelter we could take of Him. Does that make sense? Yeah. Davy, Radhika, do you want to share something?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I didn't know if you saw the hands up or not. I'm not sure where to start because I want to share so much. But I remember when I first started this journey, to yoga, and then which led to bhakti and Vedanta. I was so when I was first told when I first learned that like we just forget, like we've just forgotten. It was like a 50-year-old weight of 1,000 million lifetimes had like dropped because I always felt like there was something wrong with me. Not that like, there was just who I really was just forgotten. And it once I really delved into that, one thing led to another, led to another. For me, that was like the beginning of freeing, um, of kind of reaching this moment of feeling free of the past. But like I said, one thing led to another and another. But what I also wanted to comment on is what you had just mentioned about, and what Maria had just mentioned, like, you're riding the wave and you're like, wow, this is great. I'm feeling connected. I'm in a good spot. It's down, and you're just enjoying the moment. And, like the ocean, waves come and go. And, you can liken life to, or the material world, to riding a roller coaster and up and down or what have you. But the fact that it gives us, the closer we get to our source, it gives us the ability, like you had said, to look at the lessons within sort of that, you know, downhill ride. And it's going to come back up because you have the tools to use and the faith and the practice and everything to kind of ride that wave. And so you feel more grounded, or you can see the lessons in the struggles. And um, that to me is such a beautiful thing, because it's not so much like I'm floating in the clouds of like, I can levitate and meditate and, live in my cave of renunciation. I have more moments within a day that I find the beauty of connection and the beauty of God. And, when I forget, my moments of forgetting are shortened. They don't last, sometimes they last days. I'm human, I feel my feelings. Some things are tougher than others, but like, I don't dig myself further and further and further and further and further, month after month, year after year into these holes. I've been able to connect through so many different practices, through yoga, and then remember, like, I'm here right now. This is how it feels. Kind of like, this too shall pass. Here's what I can do. Acknowledge it, surrender, move on. And so I'm able to stand a few more pearls on the journey of a daily existence of happiness. And to me, right now where I'm at, that is such freedom and such bliss.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, and that is exactly what this practice does for us. It just shortens those moments that we're overcome by this intense anxiety, because we're in this material existence, this material nature. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Sometimes, I have a really stable life, like more stable than it's ever been. I have a good husband, a nice home. I don't work. I take care of my daughter. It's like, and sometimes I think like, wow, what would happen? What would happen to me if I lost all of this? Because it could all be gone in a second. We like to think that's not true, but the reality is it is. And where would we be, if we lose all of our material security? And we don't like to think like that, but this practice, hopefully if that unfortunately happens to us, we are not so broken. We're going to be broken, and we're going to be broken for a while, but we're not like broken beyond repair, that this like brings us into a downward spiral and we just can't get our way back up. This practice is like that lifeline, like that hand down, that's like, and we're training ourselves to always reach up, and little by little, when we start to surrender our life to God, He gives us those opportunities so that we can learn, where we need to reach our hand up higher, where we need to hold it with more determination, so that little by little, when those moments come, when we have big moments where we lose our security, which is going to happen to us all, at some point we're going to lose a big part of our security, or what we're attached to in this world. we have it, we're that a hand is exercise, and it can hold itself up, and it can hold itself up strong and long. And in that we can take complete shelter of what is eternal, because we have to prepare for those moments, and they're inevitable. Even if things are great for you now, things are going to switch. You're going to go through hard times. Your material conceptions are going to be challenged. Things are going to change. And what are we taking shelter of? And it's a practice, just like any other relationship. We have to constantly invest in and build, and so that it's strong. And it should be strong. Hopefully, it's strong all the time. But it's then when we have those moments, we don't completely flounder and fall. So thank you for sharing. And I also love that point you said about it doesn't mean that you're bad just because you have these anartas in you. You have this emotional clutter, these feelings of pride, envy. It's not that you're bad. It's you're actually quite pure and beautiful, but you're covered. You're too overcome by these material identities, and in that way, you're covered and you're ignorant, but you're not bad. I love that, because psychologically, when we start to think that we're bad, that we identify with, I'm just not a good person, it can bring us really low. That's like the opposite of the fertile ground that we need for connection. So we have to kind of reframe that. We're not bad. We're covered, and we're actually quite beautiful and pure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Okay, so we talked about there's three parties involved: the soul, material nature, and the Lord. Okay. So if nature's doing everything, we talked about how this is our nature, how we become covered, and that's our nature. Does that mean that we are helpless and not responsible? So the answer to that is no. Nature will make us act in a certain way, but even within these like natural urges are things that can be dovetailed and things that can be curtailed. So things that we can spiritualize and things that we need to just cut. So this is going to happen, but now we're developing this knowledge so that we can discern between things that we can spiritualize and things that we need to kind of cut out. So our natural propensities, like our varnas, when we talked about like a brahmana, a kshatriya, whatever your natural inclinations are, like if you're a person who's more contemplative, if you're a person who's more active, whatever your varna is, that needs to be dovetailed. So if you like to bake, then you bake for God. If you're a stay-at-home mom, then you're taking care of your child as a service, as an instrument to God. In that way, we try to dovetail our natural propensities. Things that we need to kind of cut are these things like lust, anger, greed, envy, pride, illusion. Those things need to be kind of cut. And we will have bits of those in our nature. And we need to recognize when we're coming up, not identify with them, know that it's not us, and try to kind of curtail them, try to kind of minimize them to the best that we can. And we do that by reinforcing this real knowledge, by remembering who we actually are. If we remember we're a spirit soul, we're not going to be envious. Right? We talked about how envy is, we can't be envious if we remember that we're actually a spirit soul and that we're all subject to these laws of karma. I can't be envious of my neighbor for having a bigger house because that's his karma. So if we can actually, can imbibe this knowledge, these anartas that come from our mistaken identities will realize are not even real. So our natural propensities, we dovetail, just to spiritualize, dovetail in God's service. And then these anartas that are just kind of like speckles, like speckles on what's like actually a clean, beautiful, vessel, we just kind of get rid of because they're not real. And we have to do that by reinforcing this knowledge and by connecting with source. But both of these things, both our natural propensities and our anartas, they result from our identification with the body. Some of them can be utilized, and some of them need to be controlled. So we have to kind of figure out the difference between them. And some of them, like even if you're like kind of an aggressive person, maybe you become like a protector of society, like a cop or, somebody that can protect others. Sometimes our nature, it can be dovetailed. We can figure out a way to spiritualize it. And sometimes we we need to kind of try to work on it. So at a liberated level, a person who's liberated, they don't identify with any bodily identifications. But at this sadhaka level, at this level where we're practicing, we understand in principle that we're not the body and that we're the soul. Like if anybody asks us, we'd all say that. We're able to say that and to know that. But we also understand that our bodies have a particular nature and that I need to act according to my nature. And that if I don't, if I repress my nature or I try to, act like I'm more spiritual than I am, we're only going to make back progress. We're going to take one step forward, two steps back. So we have to kind of understand our natures and try to dovetail them into the service of God. If you're a person who really likes making money, give some of that money to service projects. Whatever it is, see if there's a way that you can dovetail it into spiritualize it. Then it can become spiritual. But what we can't do, we can't put all of our hopes and energy into material success. And this material success, like we talked about, that leads to comparison, competition, criticism. We can't put all of our hopes and energies there. Not if we're serious about our spiritual progress. When we act, we can't become infatuated or elated or dejected by what I can do with my body. We can't become like just so overly identified with it. Like if you're someone who's really good at speaking and you become super proud of yourself and people praise you and you just kind of like imbibe all of that. That's why we have this practice of somebody, compliments us. We give it all away. We give it all to our teachers. We give it all to God, right? Because we know that if we hold on to it, it's just going to further clutter our mind, cover our soul, and we're going to become overly identified with these things. And that's not to say that, you can't recognize what you're good at, but there's a difference when we're becoming overly identified in a way that we're feeling better than everybody else. We're feeling overly proud. We are reliant on that praise. That's when we know that we're getting overly identified. So there's that kind of fine line. It's good to know what you're good at and, to be confident in that. But know when you're overly identifying, because to the degree that you're overly identifying with it, it's like you're like just layering these dirty layers on your soul. So just ignorance is just like accumulating. And it just makes it harder and harder to realize who we actually are and live from that place. And this can be the other side too. If you're not good at this, if you're not good at something and you start, I do this is like, I'm so hard on myself. If things aren't going the way that I want them to go, or if I don't feel like I, did as good as I could have, you get so hard on yourself. And then you start going into this like, downward spiral of I'm not good enough. I should have done this. It really affects your mind and emotionally you feel really like bogged down in it. And this is the opposite side of the same coin. It's just another form of illusion, another product of this over-identification with this mind-body machine, with this vehicle. So whatever body faculty we have, whatever we're good at, use it in God's service. And in this is the way that we can make this steady spiritual advancement and move forward. This is how we can transcend the modes. This whole system, this whole karmic system, we can transcend. We won't be affected by material nature, and we'll return to God. Now I have a little bit more on this verse, but before I continue, does anybody want to share anything? I can continue. So the other point here is that we have to be careful to not get too obsessed with identifying the cause when something in our life doesn't go our way. Anybody do that? Like just get so stuck in like, oh my, I do this all the time. Like, why did that person treat me that way? Why is that person doing that? What, like, and I just like, my mind like can't stop until I figured it out. Like I'm just like so emotional around it, and I can't, that won't like lessen until I figure it out. You get so stuck in that. It's like a patient who's sick and obsesses and blames others and themselves over the cause instead of just searching for your cure. And that's what the Gita is doing here for us. It's giving us a cure. Saying, here's the cure. Focus on this. Right? Don't get too caught in this web of why is this happening to me? Why is this person treating me this way? You know, we can't blame others. We can't blame God, and we can't blame ourselves. We need to understand that others are ultimately instruments of our own karma, which can be kind of difficult sometimes if we really feel like somebody did us wrong. It's ultimately that's your karma. That's maybe highlighting something that you need to work on, or maybe that's just happening to you because, lifetimes ago, that's some kind of karma that you accrued and now you have to burn off. So we have to understand that. We have to understand that God is like a judge and he rules based on our deeds. And blaming ourselves for our mistakes can also be pretty damaging if it triggers things like unhealthy guilt, depression, a cycle of like beating yourself up. We have to let go of that. And we have to come back to this knowledge, this cure, that at our core, we're pure. Whatever our misdeeds are. Think about like the thing you've done that you're most ashamed of. Okay, that's not you. At your core, you're pure. And your purity is covered by ignorance, which makes us act carelessly. That's what happens. You were maybe overly identified with your material identification. And you were so overly identified that you were just accumulating this thick film of dirt on that soul. And so its true essence couldn't shine out. And then what you were experiencing, your actions were just a result of that over-identification, that kind of confusion. So in the same way that we don't you know, reprimand our kids when they're confused, we need to be gentle with ourselves over times that we were confused. And we maybe went too far chasing something that we thought would make us happy and hurt other people. Right? And if we want to get out of this, instead of focusing on why we did that or how that happened or why this person did this to me, put all that energy into the cure, into understanding your real identity, connecting with that, connecting with source. And in that, the ignorance, the film that's covering that soul will lessen and you won't even have to worry about it anymore. That film will kind of dissolve, the fog will clear, and you'll be able to see much more clearly and make decisions from that place and act from that place. And so it doesn't serve us to focus too much on the cause. We need to come back to this place of knowing our true identity and living from that place. Because ignorance influences both our actions and our reactions. And it makes us agonize over causes instead of seeking relief in this wisdom. And that's what deludes us. So blaming this ignorance, it doesn't mean, again, that we're not responsible for our actions, but it does help us to distance ourselves intellectually and emotionally from it. And just that distance can help us, right? Understanding that it's the absence of knowledge that causes us to go against our own true nature. So we still have to take responsibility, okay? But if we can understand the way that things are, the way that things happen, we can understand, we can keep ourselves from overly identifying with our mistakes and making that mean something about us or others. And then we can plug back into source, live from this place this knowledge that we're the spirit soul. And that knowledge in itself will enable us to see things more clearly and to navigate in this world with less harm to ourselves and others. And the more that we act in spiritual light in a mood of service to God, the more that we'll become free from ignorance and these deadly effects. Does anybody want to share anything before I move on to the next point? Stacy.
Hey there. So I feel like this is such, I mean, I know there's so many different like texts and verses and chapters. This one is sort of like, sorry, that's noise in the background. This one is literally like the one that when you're really trying to leave, or at least me, when I'm really trying to leave that material world behind and know that I am a spirit soul and that things are going to happen, and then if somebody acts in a certain way, like that's their stuff, not mine. Like, and I don't want to own it, but I do, but I don't want to. So it's like the Gita is telling me how not to own it. It's telling me how to live in my true spirit's place. But because I've lived in the material world for so long, it's like I've stopped chastising myself for falling back, for going into that place when I do it now, the longer I stay with Source, with Krishna, the less time I spend falling back. So if I fall back, I'm like, oh shoot, what am I doing? And I come back out of it. But it's like I used to chastise myself, which made it last like days long. Whereas now I'm like, all right, you know what? I lived the material world for a long time. Uh, That's what I'm used to, but I know better now. And so
Mm,
now I'm making a quicker kind of r- joining right back into where I need to be. And so such a, this is a heavy chapter for me at least. And it's a really deep one because it's the one that really shows us you are not a material body. You are a spirit soul. And here's how to live in that.
mm.
Boom.
So nice. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And that's such a relatable thing. It's like taking on other people's skunk. And how often do we do that? Because that's really like that's where we're identified. That's who we're around all the time, what we're doing, and we get so overly involved in what other people think, right? Or what other people, the way other people treat us, right? We come to make that mean something about ourselves, and we can't shake it. We're so overly identified with this person's opinion or conception of us when we know who we are. Right? We know who we are at our core, and we're working on understanding, the intricacies of our mind-body vehicle. And in that, we're doing the best we can. And you just perfectly imbibed all of that. So thank you, Stacy. Does anybody else want to share? Okay, great. So this next, yeah, I love that mind-body vehicle. I agree. So this next point is that we're not in control. We're not in control. As much as many of us like to think that we are, we're not in control. It's like a soldier is on a battlefield with no weapons, and he's in a line of fire. An attack comes, and he's helpless. Okay, we're similar in that when a karmic bullet can come at any time and tear us down, we need to understand that we're completely dependent on God. Just like we were talking about earlier, everything could be great. You could have just be at the top of your game. You feel so connected. All of a sudden, you get diagnosed with something that completely changes your life. This karmic bullet just comes out of nowhere. Is that karmic bullet going to completely dismantle you? And it probably will. But in that moment, where are we going to seek shelter? Are we going to seek shelter in something like alcohol or sleep? Or are we going to reach our hand up? Right? Are we going to reach our hand up? Are we going to have that relationship with God such that that's natural? That's the first thing we do because we've been practicing it here every day, right? That's the first thing that's going to happen. And we're going to recover from that. It's going to make us stronger. It's going to bring us closer to God. It's going to make us more loving, more compassionate of others. So that's what we need to understand here is that we have such limited control and such limited capacity. So when problems come our way, we should deal with them according to our capacity, but understand that it's limited. Again, like this disease that comes, there's not a lot that you can do. Sometimes these things happen to us. There's not a lot we can do. And sometimes that's hard to swallow when we're a person that is used to doing and used to being successful. And if we haven't really started to kind of coat our consciousness with this knowledge, then this can be a really difficult pill to swallow, when we learn that we're not really in control. And God will teach you that through the course of your life. If not over and over, eventually you'll get something in your lap that makes you realize you're not really in the control that you thought you were, because that's the nature of this material existence. So better to know that, better to kind of coach your consciousness with this knowledge so that the blow is softer when it comes. Not that it's not going to happen, because it will, but we should understand that that's the nature of this material existence that we're in. If we understand that we're not the body and that we're the soul, we understand, okay, this body is, being torn down by this disease. That's going to happen, but I will get another one. I'll get another one. And if I don't understand this, it can be crushing. We can feel completely helpless. But when we understand that we're greater than our body and our life is greater than this lifetime, then that expands and enriches our conception of existence. And this is the only thing that can bring us hope when we're in grim situations. So in the next verse, Krishna is going to tell us how we can be free from this ignorance. And this next verse, I don't know that I'm going to have time to get into this next verse, actually. Does anybody else want to share any things that really hit you about this verse? We haven't heard from Stella. Stella, do you have anything to share with us this time? Oh, look at Stella's cat. Oh, you're on mute, Stella. Oh, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm a little headachy today, so I'm just listening.
Oh, no. Okay, okay. Well, good to have you.
Thank you.
Mariah, do you want to share anything with us?
Hi, Krishna. Sorry, I've been getting Luna ready and driving and just parked, but this class was so good. A few things. First thing that came up for me was like, it wasn't until my life was pulled out from under me that I was even able to take shelter of God.
Mm.
We talked about, sometimes we go through these hardships and it's teaching us to surrender more. Yeah, like, that was the course of my life, I had moments where I surrendered as a kid, but I could never sustain it. I mean, I would say association would have helped a lot, but going through the painful experiences that I went through in my life, just being completely pulled out from under me at one point, and just having these moments of intense grief and crying out, like, I didn't even know if God was real or not. And sometimes I was crying out in anger, like, why is my life like this? Like, what did I do that it's, in this situation? But I was still crying out to Krishna because, I had that foundation, thankfully. And then, all of a sudden Krishna came in and he showed me who he was. I mean, I had to have that desire, but Krishna does. He fans that desire. You have the slightest desire, you have the slightest cry out to God, and you ask him to help you. And, you take one step, an inch. It's not even a full step. It was an inch. And he just comes and he floods your life, And that's been my experience over the course of 4 years, And, it was like 2 really bad years. And then like now the past 2 years, it's just like, here's more service. Here's more people to associate with. Here it's coming, it's just like Krishna's reciprocating. And so it's really a beautiful thing. And then another thing that's coming up that I kind of just have to like allow to be revealed, I guess, but I'll offer it to the class is like, when we're dealing, it's like Stacy was saying, we deal with our own anarthas, but then we also can get so sucked into other people's, and like, especially if it's people maybe we're close to, it's like, it's like, how do we, I know as devotees were taught to see past their anarthas and see them as their soul. But there's always like that weird spot for myself personally, like growing up, just I can see like, okay, I can see some of your ego or your pride or this or that, and I care about you, but when is it to the point where like their ego or their pride or this or that, or their anger or whatever it is too, again, it's learning to draw that boundary, like, okay, this is too much. But
Yeah.
Sometimes you see it and you want to just be, gentle with them, or like, how do you even bring up to somebody like, hey, I think your ego's at play? It's like, that's just like a tricky thing in life that me personally, I struggle with. Like, I don't know, again, this is all choppy because it's kind of just coming up. Like, how do you just, it's like a part of me is like, well, I don't want to associate with anybody then because I don't want to see their narcissism come out in their fullest. I mean, that's just like my own fear just because of, anarthas I saw in like my caregivers and how it came out towards other people. But, yeah, there's like that fear, or like not being able to hold the boundary, or having to draw a boundary with those that you care about if that anartha becomes too inflated.
Yeah. Everything you're saying is so relatable. I know to me, and I can imagine to everybody else this hearing, it's so relatable. And I think it can be really hard too when we've taken shelter, people that are supposed to be taking care of us or guiding us, kind of, we experience their yuck and we start to take it. That could be the hardest. Like you're saying, we could start to take it to mean something about ourselves. And what that can also be is kind of an opportunity to spread our own wings and figure out who we actually are. Like maybe who we're taking shelter of. They've been done really wonderful things and they're, there for us. But maybe we need to spread our wings in a different way. Maybe the shelter we've been taking of them is kind of keeping us stuck in some aspect. And in that, this can kind of lift the veil and say, okay, you need to step up. It's kind of time for you to spread your wings in this way and understand that this person is just that, a person struggling with their own mind body vehicle. And whatever's going on, whatever they're taking out on you or is not you. And in that, it's an opportunity to gain deeper realization into who we actually are because we have to, because we have to. And like you're saying, we can't always just like dish the person. Like if a person's a parent or, a guide or a teacher that we really respect, we don't necessarily want to just like cut them off either. But we can do a couple things. One, we can try to have that conversation and saying, hey, I think your ego is getting big. Maybe not the best way to start. Maybe like,
Yeah,
hey,
of
when
course.
this happened, this is how this made me feel. And I don't know if I've taken this right but this is how it made me feel. And if they care and they're willing to work on you with it, or maybe they apologize, okay, maybe that's a relationship you can, try again. But if not, then maybe that's, something that you see as, okay, maybe I just take a little bit more distance. And so that I don't, like you said, get caught up, continue to get caught up, and in that create offenses in my mind by, thinking bad things or saying bad things or acting in ways that aren't in line. So we have to play with boundaries that way, give a little bit, see if they'll work with you. And if it's apparent that they won't, accept that and stop putting yourself in this position where you're continually disappointed and therefore like stunting your growth. Right?
Yeah. And I've definitely gone through those lessons. Actually, looking back on it, it's like, okay, I've made it through those things, but yeah, it's still like and then like nothing's necessarily even coming up, but just talking about it today in this class, it's like brought up those things again, like thinking about those. But yeah, that's kind of what happened. But I guess there's still always that grief of like, man, you wanted to see the best in those people, and you still pray for them to make it through, and there's always like even that part of you that's like, man, I wish I could still have that connection with that person and that in a different way. But sometimes, yeah, once those certain boundaries are drawn or certain things just happen, it's like very difficult to just overcome and go back to that, you know.
Well, and
But
we
it's
have
so
to,
weird as devotees, we want to maintain those connections, you know. But
well, and
yeah,
we should and we can, but maybe just in different ways, different like
yeah,
proximities of closeness and it is hard. Sometimes it's like grieving a relationship that maybe we even thought was better than it was, like letting go of
yeah,
the idea that we had for it and accepting
right,
what it actually is and what that means for our own growth.
yeah. Yeah, but it is beautiful how you put it. It does. Every time it's happened, it's like I have grown and flourished in a different way. And I could see where it was holding me back. But there's still the grief, you know, which is
There's still
totally
the grief.
normal and part of life. Yeah. But
Yeah,
thank you.
I carry the same. I still, work through layers of grief. Even when you think it's gone, it's like, oh, I really kind of wish my relationship was like that with my father.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
it just,
Yeah.
yeah.
One last thing to share about grief. I did Rambaru's grief course through the Karuna Care. And that was one of the biggest things that we talked about in that course was like, you know, grief is not like it's not linear. Like even when you think you've overcome it, it might still just pop back up. And you can grieve happy moments. Like you can grieve like a positive change in your life, but you're still gonna grieve it. And it's just like, yeah, just give yourself that space to work through it, to grieve it. Just grieve it. You know, like it's okay. It's okay to be sad that you had an attachment and it's not there. You know, it's totally okay. So that was a huge thing that just like allowed me to like not make myself wrong or like think I'm like, oh, I have to be over this or I have to not be sad about this. I grieved it, I grieved it a year ago. I grieved it 2 years ago. Like, no, it might come up in 10 more years from now still, you know? And it's totally okay to do that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share that last thing about grief.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. That's inspiring. Stella, did you have something you wanted to say? I just noticed you were off mute. That's why I asked. I know you said you
No,
were
I
had a,
saw Davy Radhika had something she wanted to say. We were talking about putting praying for folks. She put stuff people on her altar. I have like a intentional prayer list that people go up and down on, like that I try to pray for them very intently. Um and not be attached to any result of that prayer. But if someone's real, like I get that too, where I could feel grief about a certain person, um, for whatever the situation is, and I just I just lift them up to Krishna, just like I care about this person. They're yours. You love them. And
yeah.
so whether it's not like physically on your altar or in your monastery in your mind, um, I find it brings me more peace, uh, to really like every day pray for certain people.
That's really nice. And not from a place of like pity, but from a place of like love.
Yes,
Like I'd really
yes.
want this person to yeah, that's
And
when you know
I
you've
may
really
not be the I'm not at all the doer in that, and I may have no influence, but maybe my influence just is there, but they're not ready for it. Like if not that,
right.
but they're not, if they're not being as aware, they're just they're dealing, like then, but I lift them up, just lift them up to Krishna. He knows what to do, and they have their own timeline, and to be at peace with their timeline.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. A lot of that is just accepting that we can't control
Yeah, yeah,
and loving them
that's
anyway.
hard.
That's
That's
what
hard.
that is. Yeah. So nice. Thank you. Davy Radhika, do you want to take us home here?
Oh, you're so sweet. Yeah, very good shares from everyone. I was laughing inside when Mariah, you were sharing, and I was like, yeah, move your mother into your house and talk about like boundaries and lessons and praying. And it's it's been such a journey and such a blessing, really hard work. to overcome, past expectations and the grief of what childhood was and wasn't and all of it. And, you know, I didn't have a background in yoga until I was in my 50s. That's when I was introduced to it. So it really does put you in a path of being able to see things differently and taking, difficult situations from something as trying as a difficult coworker to, resolving and finally letting go of the anger and the grief and the animosity with like family relations. And it's just so beautiful. I'm not sure how to put it into words, but definitely such a relatable, always a relatable time together with everyone. Thanks for reminding me that, I'm not alone because sometimes that material world, the external pulls are strong. So thanks for grounding me today, everyone.
Same. I feel the same. Thank you all for coming and sharing and being a part of this Sangha. We all hold each other up. So thanks for doing the work. And with that, we'll see you on Monday. And we'll get into text 17. Or wait, is it? Yeah, it's 17, I think. No, 16. 16 and 17. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, Paul.
Haribol.
Haribol.